All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our session, Org Security Fundamentals. We are going to talk about different security controls and settings that you can enable in your own org to prevent unauthorized access to your data, to keep the bad guys away from your org, and it will also help you to prevent the data breaches that are happening these days everywhere. I am Swapnil Shinde. I work as a product security engineer with Salesforce under the Trust Group, and with me, I have
I'm Vinay Nataraja. I work for the product security team as well, and I work as a product security engineer.
All right, so before we start our presentation, you might have seen this many times before, but some of the features that we are going to discuss today might come in future. So if you're going to make any decisions today, like any buying decisions, make sure that your needs are met with the technology that is delivered today. All the security controls that we are going to talk today are located under the setup menu, which you can find on the top right, and then go to the left-hand side bar, search for security, and you will see all the security controls that we are going to talk today, which are present here on the left-hand side bar. Here is an agenda for today's talk. First, we are going to talk about the strong authentication, how you can enable strong authentication using different things like password policies, two-factor authentication, IP restriction, single sign-on. Then Vinay will talk about how you can further keep the bad guys out of your org. He will also talk about how you can connect the third-party apps to your org securely. And at last, we are going to mention about security health check tool. Now, this tool is new. This is a new addition to your org. Very effective tool. Most of the things that we are going to talk today, you will find those things here in this tool at one place. We are anyway going to explain you each and every feature, but you can find these things at one place in a very nice GUI, which is shown over there. So if you need to take away one thing from today's talk, that will be security health check tool. So strong authentication. Imagine your org like this room here. Now, Salesforce has provided you with a very secure and strong door, as shown here. It has a lot of bolts. You can choose to enable only one bolt, or you can configure to enable all the bolts, or you can just put your own lock on this door, which will be easily broken. So what I meant here, the analogy refers to the fact that there are a lot of security controls that come with your security org, but it's up to you to configure them in a right way that we are going to discuss today. Here is an opportunity to win some prizes. Who can answer this? Who knows what is the most common cause of data breaches these days? Any guesses? Yeah. Mike?
I don't have a mic.
Employee theft?
Employee what?
Theft or employee stealing the data?
That's a good guess, but not the right answer. You get the different prize for that. The gentleman in the next row there. Yeah. With the T-shirt. Yeah.
So it's spear phishing?
Good guess again. Here.
Yep.
You put bad code in the system.
What's that?
Bad code in the system.
Good guess. I'm looking for a particular answer, but you can still get prizes.
Port security.
You get different prize. Last try, and otherwise there are two gentlemen there who are raising hands. Otherwise, I'll tell the answer. The answer is very simple, and I already touched upon it.
It's phishing.
You're almost
Close.
The last one.
Last try. We need to move forward.
Poor passwords and reuse of
There you
passwords.
go.
You won the prize.
All right. So this is a report published in 2013. The most common cause of data breaches was at that time weak and stolen credentials, also known as passwords. Now you would think that this was in 2013, but come forward in 2016. This is the report published by Verizon, and 63% of confirmed data breaches today leverage weak or stolen passwords. So still hasn't changed. This hasn't changed a lot. You can do a lot by just focusing your efforts on passwords. How you can do that with Salesforce org, we are going to see. Last question I have is, who knows what are the most commonly used passwords? First row.
Password.
There you go. That's the right answer. One more answer. You know, there are a lot of people raising hand at the same time, so use your best judgment.
Monkey.
What's that?
Monkey.
Good guess, but not the answer. It's like the most used password. We'll try one more time, and yeah.
ABC 1 2 3.
Close.
I'm out of prizes, but
All right.
Password.
He just mentioned it. That is one of the most commonly used passwords.
Hello?
Good guess. So the most commonly used password is 123456. If you rely on users to choose their passwords, these things are going to happen. They're going to either choose a very weak password, or they're going to choose the passwords which are already leaked in other breaches and hackers already know them. What you can do with Salesforce org, in the setup menu under security, you go for password policies on the left hand side, and then you can set the policies for your org. These are the default values. If you can set more restricted values, then go ahead. 90 days should be minimum for password expiry. Minimum password length by default here is 8. You can set it to 12 and use mixed alpha and numeric characters. Now, once you have set up the passwords, there are more things you can do. The same report says that a lot of companies these days are not doing multi-factor authentication because it is not easy. However, based on the statistics, they still recommend highly that you should implement two-factor authentication. Now, the good news is with Salesforce org, it is very easy to configure two-factor authentication. What is two-factor authentication? When your users use username and password, that is a single factor that they use for authentication, which is password. Now, you can add additional factor on top of it, which is something the user knows, right? Which is tokens that are generated on their cell phone. You might have seen that. Or they can use something the user is, which is things like biometrics. So we are going to talk about the second factor today, which are the tokens that are generated on user's phone. So as I mentioned, second factor could be either a one-time password token that is generated on the user's phone, or it could be a push notification that is generated on user's phone. Now, you can configure this in the Salesforce org using either the user profiles or permission sets. I'm going to show you how to do that. You can use it at a login time, or you can also use it for step-up kind of operations. For example, if you want to run a report and export the data, this is like a privileged operation, right? So you can enable two-factor authentication for those kinds of operations. We are not going to cover that today, but we are going to cover how you can do two-factor authentication for user login. As I mentioned, you can do it with the permission sets. In the menu on the left-hand side, search for permission sets, label that permission set something like two-factor authentication required. Go to the system properties of that particular permission set and enable two-factor authentication as shown in the slide. Now go to a particular user for whom you want to enable the two-factor authentication and select this permission set and assign that permission set to that particular user, save it, and when the user logs in for the very next time to a Salesforce org, now he needs to connect a mobile app, a cell phone app, authenticator app to his org. He will see the screen which is shown on the left-hand side. Now, the cell phone app that we recommend is Salesforce Authenticator app that is available for both iOS and Android. You can also use other authenticator apps that are used in market like Google Authenticator. We recommend Salesforce Authenticator because I'm going to talk why. But here the user needs to connect that Salesforce Authenticator app on the cell phone to his org. When he or she adds a new account to the Authenticator app, he will see a two-word phrase there. He needs to enter it here and click on connect, or he can also choose to connect using a QR code. Once this is done for the very first time, the user's app is connected to Salesforce org to his own profile. Now, the next time when the user logs in, he puts in his password, and the screen asks him for one more thing, which is the code that he can get from his cell phone app and put in there. Now, the very good thing with the Salesforce Authenticator version V2 is that we have introduced a new push notification. Here, the user doesn't need to read the code and enter it in the org. he will just get a push notification inside his Salesforce app. He need to either approve or deny by clicking as shown in these buttons, and that's it. This is like an increased user experience. So this has come up in Authenticator version 2. If you haven't implemented it already, this is a great time to implement these things. Now, you did password policies, you did two-factor authentication. What else you can do to avoid unauthenticated access? You can do IP ranges restriction. Now, IP range restrictions means the user will be allowed to log into the org only when he's coming from trusted IP addresses. And these trusted IP addresses could be your company's outbound IP addresses or VPN outbound IP addresses. Now, there are two ways in which you can configure this setting. One is at the organization level or at the user profile level. And we'll talk about both of those. Now, first approach is doing it at the organization level. Imagine your employees are sitting in some kind of conference, right? Like this conference. And if they want to access an org, and if you put a very restricted control, they won't be able to log into your Salesforce org because they're not coming in from your IP addresses, like your company's IP addresses. But if you do this configuration at the organization level, then they will still be able to log in, even though they are not coming from your company's IP addresses, but they need to undergo a login challenge, which I'm going to show you how does it look. Once they complete the additional login challenge, a cookie will be set into their browser, and they can use that browser to log into Salesforce org, even though they're not coming in using the trusted IP addresses. So this is good for your employees which are not sitting inside the company all the time. They're traveling. They can still access the Salesforce org using this kind of control. Now this is the identity confirmation code that the extra login challenge that they get when they are not coming from the trusted IP addresses. This is how you can configure it. Under the same setup menu on the left-hand side, search for security and go to network access. If you configure your IP address range here, then it will be applied to the whole org. Now consider another use case. You have some contractors, they're coming on site and they're working on Salesforce org. You want to give them access only when they are on site inside your company. When they go out, their home or something, you don't want to give them the access to Salesforce org. At that time, you can create a contractor profile and then put the IP restriction on the whole contractor profile. This is very restricted. The users will be blocked if they are not coming in via your company's source IP addresses. So this is the second method by which you can do IP restrictions, and which is just blocks the user if they are not coming in from your company's IP addresses. So you go to the user profile. You can search for profile in the left-hand sidebar, and then set up the IP range inside a particular profile, and then this control is applied at the profile level in the blocking mode. All right, the last thing I'm going to talk today is about single sign-on. Now, this is one of the controls that is not covered in the security health tool that I mentioned before. Remember, only one thing if you can take away from this talk is the security health tool. However, the companies do need to enable the single sign-on for their organizations or Salesforce orgs. There are two ways in which you can configure it, delegated authentication and SAML-federated authentication. We support SAML-federated authentication out of the box, and the configuration is, again, very easy. So SAML-federated authentication is very useful because the employees or users of the org don't need to remember passwords for their org if they're remembering the password for one system that you trust inside your company, which is the identity broker system. So they can log into that system and they will be automatically logged into Salesforce. And what happens on the back end is the SAML assertions. So Salesforce org and your trusted identity provider talks between each other using the SAML assertions. So here are the two scenarios. Check out the left-hand side diagram. The user logs into Salesforce, then Salesforce on the back end, user tries to log into Salesforce, and the Salesforce on the back end sends the SAML assertions to your identity provider. If they are logged into the identity provider inside your environment, the SAML assertions will be exchanged and the user will be logged in automatically. Or the user can first go to the identity provider, right-hand side diagram, and then they click on the icon for Salesforce org, and the SAML assertion will be sent from the identity provider to Salesforce org, and the user will be automatically logged in. They don't need to remember passwords for all the applications, or at least the Salesforce org, because we support this today. These are the configurations. Again, I'm not going to go detail into single sign-on because that is a broader topic, but just keep in mind that you can configure this for your Salesforce org. This is supported today. You can find out the configurations on the left-hand sidebar again, search for single sign-on. With that, now we are going to look at how we can keep bad guys out, and Vinay will present.
Thanks, Swapnil. So how do we keep the bad guys out? We use secure sessions. Basically, let's say if the hacker has already compromised one of the user session, you want to keep your session timeout as low as possible. And if, let's say, he has compromised one of the passwords, how do we make sure that the password is rotated or changed as soon as possible? So in this section, we are going to talk about session settings, which will explain how you can do session expiration, activations. As Swapnil mentioned, when you create a when the user logs in from a different IP address than your VPN, an activation message is sent, and that is logged, you can go and remove that IP address. The session management, how you can delete and remove sessions. And last thing is expire all passwords. This is the worst case scenario. If there's a compromise of user passwords, you can go to this page and expire all the users' passwords. Let's dig in deep on each one of them. Session settings. This is under the security control session settings. We have a lot of options here. The main thing is the timeout value. We advise you to keep it as low as possible, but not as low which affects usability. For example, if you keep the timeout value as 15 minutes, that means that, let's say the user is writing a chatter post and he's writing a long chatter post and this session times out before that, he would not be able to use the application properly. So keep it in some mid-range and make sure it's low as possible, but it doesn't affect usability as such. There are many other session settings like lock sessions to the IP address. That means, let's say he logs in to Salesforce using your VPN range. Then he goes home, opens a laptop, connects to his home Wi-Fi, and the IP address is now different. Now, this particular setting tells if the user should be logged out or should the user should remain in Salesforce. The next setting is log session to domain. So if you're using my domain in your org, and if the user uses my domain to log in and then he gets redirected to Salesforce NA14 or NA instance domain, should the session remain? Or if he's logged in using the partner app, partner community, and if he wants to log into the main community, should the session remain or not? There are many other settings that I wanted to go through and configure it depending on your org. Next, we'll talk about the activations. So as Swapnil mentioned, when the user logs in from your different IP range, then it's in the network access, you get a challenge confirmation. In this page, you can go and remove certain IP ranges or certain IP addresses so that if user logs in again from that IP range, he gets a challenge confirmation again, and he's not automatically logged in. In activations, you can also remove browsers. So let's say he's logged in from an untrusted browser from a shared computer, and you want to remove that browser from his logged in list. You can go here and remove that particular browser from the list. Next thing is the session management. So this page is visible for the user and the admin. If you log in as a user, all your user sessions are visible. So if you're logged in from your phone or you log in from your laptop, and you don't want the user, let's say you lost your phone and you want to deactivate that session, you can go ahead here and deactivate that particular session. As an admin, you'll be able to deactivate multiple user sessions using this tool. Next thing is the expire all passwords page. We hope you don't use this page, but let's say there's a compromise of user passwords and you want to expire all the user passwords immediately. You can go here, check this option, and click Save. Remember that once you do this, every user who logs in again will be asked to change the password. Then moving on to the next section, the connected apps. So what is a connected app? Connected app is nothing but an application or a third-party application which tries to communicate to Salesforce using Salesforce APIs. So administrator has the permissions to give strong permissions for the particular connected app and make sure they follow for principle of least privilege. To deploy a connected app, you have two modes. One, you create a connected app in your own org, or if the connected app is created in some other org, and then you install it on your org. So using a connected app, admin can configure the settings so that it respects, let's say, IP range restrictions, or it's only available for certain users. And admin should obviously follow the principle of least privilege and make sure only permissions are given for the required users. Connected apps can also be used for SAML authentication and OAuth authentication. So if you're using OAuth for a third-party application and you want to log into Salesforce, connected app can be used for that. So if you want to move from a connected app from a different org, you can use managed package to do that. So you can move a connected app from a different org to one org. OAuth, in Salesforce, we support various flows. The most basic ones are these. So the web server flow basically means that, as shown in the diagram, the user goes to the client then redirects the user to this authorization server. Salesforce does the authorization, passes on the tokens to the client, and then the client accesses the data using the token that is generated. So if you want to use single sign-on like OAuth, you can use the web server flow. We have other flows like a user agent flow, JW to bearer token flow. If you have SAML sessions and you want to use OAuth to that, you can use SAML bearer assertion flow or SAML assertion flow. And also we support the user and password flow. Let's say you have a username and password, you want to get the token using that, you can use a username and password flow for that. As I told before, you need to follow principle of least privilege. Make sure the settings you give for a connected app is as less permissive as possible. So for example, if you have IP restrictions, make sure to enforce IP restrictions in your connected app as well. And also, for example, you want to keep the token refresh to be as short as possible so that if the core token gets compromised, not much information is lost. This is the OAuth permissions for the connected app. Here as well, make sure, let's say if an app does single sign-on or just signs you in to some other application, you just want to give the basic information. You don't want to give the app the full access. If the app has full access, that means that they can query back to Salesforce and get all the data from your org using this particular token. Remote site settings. So if you're using a Visualforce page and you want to make an Apex callout, or if you're using Apex, you want to make a Visualforce callout, you need to configure remote site setting. This setting enables you to make callouts to that particular site. To configure this, you need to go to the remote site settings page, give a name, a unique name, a URL. We recommend that you do not check the disable protocol security option so that the call is done over HTTPS and not over HTTP. So finally, I want to talk about the security health check tool. Basically, this tool, whatever we talked about today, most of the stuff we talked about today, it basically takes everything and gives you in a neat way all the information required. For example, remote site settings, login access policies, password policies, session settings, network access, etc. It also gives you a score. Basically, it compares the values that you have in your org to a standard value. Depending on that, it gives you a score of how secure your org is. And you can configure, let's say you have weak password policy and you want to make it better. There's a take action button right there. You can just click on that and the user is redirected to that particular page where he can change the password policies and stuff. How does it work? Basically, the tool queries about 20 security nodes, gets all the information, and depending on the information it's got, it's going to classify it as at high risk, medium risk, or low meet standard. And using this, basically the admin can go to, let's say if it's a high risk, can go take an action depending on that, and also depending on your business risk, you can change the settings and make the whole org safer. These are some additional resources that we have. I do encourage you to go to the Developer Security Forum. There are a lot of people who kind of help you out if you have any security questions. And with that, Swapnil, you want to cut?
Yeah. So there are other security-related presentations that are happening in Dreamforce. This is the schedule. Tuesday is already gone, but Wednesday, today, there are some more sessions in the developer forest. There is one at 4:30 in ISV zone. There are a couple of them, which are already over now. But tomorrow also, there are 2, and on Friday, there are 2 more. With that, thank you. I want to encourage you to come and talk at the security booth, which is right here. If you have any questions, our engineers and the people who work on Salesforce security, they are there to answer your questions. But other than that, if you have any questions for right now, you can ask. And thank you for attending.